Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning, where we're going to take you through the latest information and guidance on coronavirus. So this is part 6 of our webinar series. So we've done one, we've been doing this on a weekly basis. A bit of housekeeping before we get started with the webinar. So it is a broadcast, so unfortunately we're unable to hear any questions you do have, and I've got another slide which will show where you can ask any questions, because we're going to save quite a bit of time towards the end for some live Q&As. So I'll show you where you add those questions shortly. Hopefully you can all see my screen. In terms of timing, we have got this booked in for half an hour. Over the past few weeks, it does slightly overrun by a couple of minutes, but if you have to jump off sharply at 10:30, then that's fine. Don't worry, we're going to get out a recording, so that is being recorded, and we'll share the recording. If it's not today, it'll certainly be tomorrow when we get the recording over to you. Anybody who's looking for a bit more information around coronavirus, COVID-19, then if you go to our knowledge centre, which is if you just go to our website, moorepay.co.uk, at the top there's a knowledge centre. You'll find various different blogs, guides. You'll see also registration for our webinars on there. We try to keep it up to date. We try and do it on a daily basis, keep up to date with the latest information that's being circulated. In terms of intros for this webinar, today we've got Michelle Hobson. She's our HR Services Director. We've got Phil Barker, who's our Health and Safety Team Manager, and also Audrey Robertson, our HR Consultancy Manager. And then you've got myself, Daniel Cookson, Head of Product Marketing here at Moorepay. Just from some of the questions that we got last week, we have set up, we're in the process of setting up a couple of webinars for our payroll customers. So we're going to take you through over a series. I think there's going to be 2 webinars whereby we'll explain what you should do for the job retention scheme inside our payroll solution. So this is more going to be aimed at our payroll customers, so people using our payroll software. So look out for those. They're going to go up on our website, but also you will get emailed, and also you'll be informed of those through the in-app messaging as well. So if we get on to the webinar, in terms of agenda, we're going to go through the current stats and the latest stats that we've got from the government. Then we're going to go through some legislation updates. So we've got job retention scheme, emergency volunteering, and also annual leave and accruals. We've got just a couple of minutes on just some of the supporting activities we've got just before we get into our live Q&A. So I mentioned before about questions. There is a panel on the GoToWebinar box, and it'll look a little bit like this. You put in your question, and then when we get to that section, I'll be asking our presenters here the questions that you ask. Now, in the past few weeks, we do get quite a lot of questions. What we promise to do is make sure that we get them all answered, but it might not be on this webinar. What we will do is come back and email you all the answers that everyone's asked on the webinar. I won't read out anybody who's asked it. All this does is enable us to email you back and know who's asked the question. I'll just ask the question itself and hopefully get answered today. So throughout the webinar, if you've got any questions, if you want any more information, because I know we've got prospects and we've got customers on here, if you want any more information about Moorepay services or how we can support you further, just put it in the questions box, and again we can find out who's asked that and we can get back to you. So I'm going to pass over firstly now over to Michelle. So over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Dan. We always start these webinars with going through the latest stats and then talking to you about the current advice. And this is something that we are taking a lot of care to do at Moorepay, and make sure that we stay on top of all the latest advice, all the latest updates, and then very quickly turn that into something that is useful for our customers and also for our prospects, when you'll see on our knowledge centre on our website. So if we just go on to the next slide, then I'll talk to you about the current stats as of yesterday. So as of Monday, the 6th of April 2020, there were 51,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 across the UK, and that so far has resulted in 5,373 deaths. you will see the graphs that are generally produced by the government, that cases are rising and then falling and then rising again, and there isn't really a clear pattern at the moment. The risk to the UK has been declared by the government as high, and it remains so. We all know that we are in essentially a lockdown period, which is to be reviewed next Monday, Easter Monday. But I think everyone is speculating that it is likely to continue. And from the updated guidance from the government yesterday in their latest press conference, they would need to see a sustained period of drop before they would consider starting to release this lockdown period. But that will be based on what they see at the time. Just for information and interest there, you will see that it is broken down by country and the cases and deaths by country. We just go on to the next slide. So we talked about this last week, and I think it's worth going through these points again, talking to you about the job retention scheme. This has been one of the biggest changes that the government have announced and what this means for businesses. We've had some further updates that came through on the 4th of April, and you'll see the web link at the top, which is the most up-to-date guidance from the government, and recommend that you review that. But just to kind of go through the top things on there, this is a scheme that is open to all UK employers for at least 3 months, backdated to the 1st of March 2020. And it's designed to support businesses who've been severely affected by COVID-19. There are other schemes and cuts available to businesses to use, and they are also available on the government website, but the job retention scheme is one of those. And essentially, employers can use a portal to claim for 80% of furloughed employees' salary, and that is their usual monthly wage up to £2,500 a month. They must have been employed on or before the 28th of February to be eligible for this scheme, and it applies to full-time, part-time, 0 hours or flexible workers. It does also apply to agency workers, but they would be furloughed by their umbrella company. Furlough basically means that an employee remains on payroll but cannot do work for you during this time, and employees must be furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks. It must be confirmed to an employee in writing, and in the vast majority of cases, this will be subject to some communication, a small form of consultation and acceptance by the employee to change their status to furlough. One of the updates that we got this last week in terms of the updated guidance was about apprentices. Now, apprentices can be furloughed, but also can continue to train. If they continue to train and you continue to draw on the apprenticeship funding, apprentices must be paid at that apprenticeship minimum wage for the time that they spend training, even if it's more than 80% of their normal wages. You'll only be able to claim back 80% from the government, so that will involve some top up, but it's an important piece of clarification that we've had in the last week. Okay, if we go on to the next slide then, I will hand over to Audrey to talk a bit more about some of the clarification around emergency volunteering and annual leave.
Yes, thanks, Michelle. I just wanted to touch on the emergency volunteering because, as most of you will have heard, there's around about 750,000 registered volunteers now. They've temporarily closed the application process while they process all of these. So with those sort of numbers, it is going to start touching on employers. So I thought it might be worthwhile just running through what the provisions are for the emergency volunteers where they are in employment. So basically, the government's designated a 16-week volunteering period. They may potentially designate further periods after that, but within this 16-week period, an individual can say they will volunteer for either 2, 3, or 4 weeks in a single block. So at some point during that 16 weeks, they will take that time to volunteer. If you're an organisation that has 10 or more employees, then the law now says that you must release employees to go and volunteer in the same way that they may need to be released for things like jury service or army call-up, which is something else that's obviously topical at the moment as well. So it's a form of leave from work that's now set out in law. So it's unpaid leave. You don't have to pay people while they are volunteering, and in fact they will be able to claim loss of earnings directly from the Secretary of State. So we're not sure quite how that will work and what that will involve any employers in doing. That's something we're waiting for a bit of clarification on. Other than pay, all of their employment rights continue, so they will have continuity of employment through that, exactly in the same way as if they were off on something like paternity leave. They have a right to return to the same job on the same terms and conditions afterwards, and also they have a right not to suffer any detriment or even to be dismissed because they have volunteered or are going to volunteer, or even that their employer perceives them to be going to volunteer. So we just have to be very careful with handling those requests. How do you know someone is a volunteer? The government, well, specifically the NHS, but also local authorities and the Secretary of State will be issuing authorised volunteers with a certificate, and your volunteer will need to present that to you at least 3 days before their intended first day of volunteering. So it's a fairly short notice period. Probably worth thinking about having some dialogue with your employees up front in order to sort of set out what you might do. That's if you are aware that some of your employees might have signed up for this. So that's something a little bit different. We've talked mainly about furlough in the previous webinars, but that's certainly something to bear in mind because, as I said, the numbers are quite high now. So if we just move on to the next slide, if we could. We also wanted to talk a little bit this week about annual leave because there's quite a lot of confusion around this, we're finding. Obviously, companies and other organisations are in very different situations. For some employers, there's just no way you could let anybody take any annual leave at the moment because you're key workers, you're very, very busy. For other employers, there are questions around while people are furloughed, holidays that have been booked, whether they can make employees take holidays. So just wanted to run this through with you. Furloughed employees are entitled to accrue holidays all during their furlough period. If they want to take holidays while they're on furlough, you have to top that up to 100%, not 80% that you get back from the government, but you'll need to make up that difference because they're entitled to their full holiday pay. If you want to make an employee take some holiday, you are entitled to do that. It must be that you give them some notice. So if you want somebody to take a week of their holiday, you must give them at least 2 weeks notice of them needing to do that. And that also applies, obviously, if you want to cancel holiday for an employee. An interesting development from the government is that employees who can't take holiday because of coronavirus will be allowed to take 4 weeks of their statutory leave into the next 2 holiday years. And one of the reasons the government's done this is that they can foresee continuing chaos if people return to work and then everyone's taking holiday within a very short period towards the end of the year. So in order to spread that out a little bit, that's why the government's come up with this idea to let people carry over. Currently, the rules say you can't carry over statutory leave, and they've just relaxed that temporarily to deal with this situation. Anyway, I'll hand over to Phil now, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the health and safety aspects.
Thank you, Audrey. This is pretty reasonably hot off the press. For the last few weeks, I think there's been some frustration around what are the rules around people going to work. Can they go to work? Should they go to work? Can people leave the house to go to work? So on Friday, the Health and Safety Executive, the Trade Union Congress and the CBI announced a joint statement, or published a joint statement rather. It's a reasonably short statement, half a dozen paragraphs. starts off with the usual. It's a worrying time. Workers and employers are really continuing to put efforts in place to make sure people are safe. The statement is an agreed statement between the three organisations, clarifying the position, but health and safety remains paramount. The key middle paragraph is on the screen, and I've highlighted and bold the part that I think is probably relevant to most of the audience, which is that firms that can safely stay open and support livelihood should not be forced to close by misunderstandings about government guidance. Anybody who watches the news will have seen major international brands being criticised for operating. I know in some of those cases, the local authority environmental health officers have been into the operations and actually said the employers doing everything they need to do to ensure the safety of their employees, and that there is no reason for those businesses to close. The statement then obviously does go on to say, however, that it's the HSE intention that if anything comes to their notice where employers are not complying with the relevant public health guidance, then they will look at a range of measures from just providing specific advice through to improvement notices or prohibition notices. So I suppose really we're at the stage where the HSE, the CBI and the TUC are saying, look, where we can work, let's keep businesses running, but let's make sure it's done safely and we follow Public Health England guidance, and make sure we've got social distancing in place, hand washing facilities, etc., etc. So we'll just move on to the next slide and we'll sort of look at how we're helping businesses maintain that or make sure they've got the conditions in place. Want to move on to the next slide for us, Dan? Or not? Okay, so how do we help employees? How are we helping employers protect their employees? Similar to the employment law side, we have a 24/7 health and safety advice line. So if you've got any problems, we can phone that number. It's the same number as your employment law, but it's option 1 for health and safety and option 2 for employment law. We have a regularly updated sample risk assessment on our HR hub that's available for clients. We actually last updated that on Friday last week. So if you're on the call and you've looked at a previous version of that risk assessment, probably worth revisiting the hub and downloading the new template, new sample, so you can update your own documents. We have a coronavirus section on the HR hub, and we've also got the chatbot on the hub and also on the moorepay.co.uk website, which will answer a lot of frequently asked questions. We're publishing detailed guidance, such as the one shown on screen, which is employers' guidance for non-home workers. So obviously the preference is where people can work from home, they should be working from home, but not every trade can work from home. People that need to make metal bearings, etc., in factories obviously can't do that at home, so they have to go into work. So this guidance note looks at things like social distancing, spreading breaks, spreading shift patterns so that you've not got as many people in the factory. Just some general guidance on how to make sure that you can make sure your staff are as safe as possible whilst at work. We're constantly reviewing this. As I said, we updated the risk assessment template last Friday based on some new NHS guidelines. And we've also got potential additional consultancy that we can give on both HR and health and safety. Obviously, the big one at the moment is a job retention scheme. So Audrey's team of HR consultants can help talk you through that. And similarly, on the health and safety side, we can help with this topic here of how to make sure people are safe whilst they're at work, and also home working. Are you doing enough? Have you got the right equipment for people working from home? So that's just a taste of what we're doing. As Dan mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of this on the Knowledge Centre, which is on the moorepay.co.uk website. And I'm sure we're probably going to look at that in a little bit more now. So back to you, Dan.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, Audrey, and Phil. So just before we get into the Q&A, I've just got on screen here just some of the services and support that we are offering both customers and also prospects. So fast track implementation. So what we've set up is if anybody's looking to move their payroll to Moorepay, we can get you set up with and get your employees paid within 48 hours. All our software is all cloud-based, so you can access it as long as you've got access to a PC and internet. Then you can access all our pieces of software, all our payroll and HR software. We've got employee self-service, so this is going to become quite apparent when you're trying to manage your employees remotely, through absences, expenses, timesheets. It can all be done via a self-serve and using your phone or tablet or PC. We've got payroll automation, so anybody who's looking at automating their payroll, so they want a bit of a hands-free, they don't want to have to go in and they don't want to have to go in and lock down, and they just want all that automation. The payments are just automate every month or every week, whatever your frequency is. We can switch that on for you. We do have a managed payroll support team, so they're based in Farnborough, so they would look after all your payments processing, making sure your employees are paid and you are compliant, so you can actually outsource your payroll to Moorepay. We mentioned, and Phil touched on it there, HR consultancy. So we've got a range of HR consultancy that we can help, again, both business for customers and also prospects with. One specific one we've got is furloughing employees. So making sure that you're doing the process correctly, fairly, you're communicating to employees. We can give you the templates. That is a piece of consultancy that we've created. And again, if you want more information on that, just put it in the questions box. We've got a HR advice line. So again, if you're looking for any advice, and it doesn't have to just be on coronavirus, it can be on any type of HR or employment law or health and safety matter, then we've got a 24-hour manned advice line. You can also ensure that advice. So should anything, and you take our best practice, should that go to a tribunal, then you can ensure that. And then also, lastly, we've got EAP. So any businesses looking for EAP programs, so an employee assistance program, again, very important in these times when your employees are working from home and you've got that remote employee base. Having an employee support program would be very beneficial. So we're gonna get into some questions now. So bear with me while I just open up the first couple, because we did have some come through before the webinar started. So just bear with me. So first question: if an employee catches COVID-19 from another employee at work, is this reportable under RIDDOR?
In that kind of situation, I'll take that one, Dan. I was just jumping straight in. In that situation, not. There are only two real instances when a COVID-19 infection for an employee will be reportable to the HSE under RIDDOR, and that relates to people working in labs and people working in hospitals, care type industries. So a normal employee in a normal workplace catching it from a colleague, no, that's not reportable under the RIDDOR regulations.
Okay, and another question that we had in, for furloughed staff, guidance says they must have been employed on February the 28th. Will this include staff who started with us before the date but were not on the February payroll because they joined after our payroll cutoff? So their first payment was in March and they were not on the RTI submission in February.
I'll take that one, Dan. Yes, if their contract of employment has a start date that was February the 28th or earlier, they would be entitled to be furloughed, because your March pay that you paid that would include any days in February that they worked. So go off the contract of employment and the date that they started.
Okay, and I think the next one we've got is very similar. For employees, just bear with me while it opens up. For employees working through us but not actively working on the week ending 28th February, can we furlough them? They have not had a P45 from us and have recently worked through us but did not have to work for that actual week.
I'll take that one again, and Audrey, jump in if you think there's anything I need to add. But if you have employees who have a contract of employment that started on or before the 28th of February and is still live that week, because furlough includes more flexible contracts or 0 hours where they may not have worked in that particular week but have worked in the week, month or year before that, then they can still be included in this scheme.
Another question we've got in, does job retention scheme cover employees who currently attend a university?
I'll take that one if you like. The rules simply state that they must be in your PAYE system. So if they are also university students, that's a separate issue. But for the hours that they work for you and are on your PAYE system, there's no reason why you can't furlough them and make claim for those hours. Michelle, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I think I would agree with you there. If they are an employee, so you will have a lot of sort of, you know, bar staff, restaurant staff who are students who are working around their university hours. As you rightly said, if they're on your PAYE system, but they work only certain hours a week because they're part-time, it doesn't make any difference. You'd furlough them for the time that they were due to work for you, but there is now no work available and you need to take advantage of the scheme.
Okay, thank you. Another question, can staff on furlough be forced to use holiday during their furlough period?
Yes, they can, provided you give them sufficient notice, and that notice is twice the length of the holiday that you want them to take. This isn't specific to furlough. This is always the case that you can insist that employees take holiday, provided you give them the proper notice. One of the things to remember, of course, is if they are furloughed, if it's holiday pay they're in receipt of, you will need to top that up to their full pay if you're only paying the 80% government grant. So for any days of holiday that they take, they must receive full holiday pay.
Okay, another one on a very similar note. If staff take leave during the furlough, does that interrupt the furlough, i.e. restart the 3-week minimum period?
I'll take this one. No, from everything that we know, that would not interrupt the furlough period because they're still not working for you. They are on holiday. We haven't had any indication from the government that that would interrupt the furlough period.
Okay, thank you. If an employee cannot, so I think it says if an employee, but I think it's an employer. If an employer cannot pay 80% until the grant comes through, do you process a 0 pay slip?
I think this is quite a difficult one to answer because you are still responsible for paying your employees even at the 80%. So if the grant doesn't come through in time for, say, April payroll, then you are still responsible for paying it. What we would advise is that there is lots of other support out there to businesses, particularly small businesses, in terms of emergency loans, in terms of rates and taxes, defer schemes. We would advise that you seek advice on all of those to enable you to pay your staff whilst you're waiting for the government grant to come through. Audrey, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that as with any other time, you have a duty to abide by the terms of the employment contract, which includes paying your employees. And if you don't pay them until the money comes through from the government, that is a breach of contract. I would advise anybody to take some very specific advice if that's your only option, because that's very exposing for your business.
Okay, we've got another one on the volunteer. Can employees only volunteer for NHS or local authority, or could they volunteer for another small organisation during furlough?
Well, obviously, while they're furloughed, they can do any volunteer work that doesn't involve providing services to their own employer. So any kind of volunteering is possible while furloughing. The Emergency Volunteer Scheme refers specifically to the certificated government volunteer scheme, and that's something slightly separate. But yes, any kind of voluntary work is possible, provided it's not you can't get them to volunteer for you, for example, or an associated company.
Okay, another one. Under the job retention scheme, what is classed as compulsory commission payments?
I would say that it would be subject to the terms of the employment contract, whether they are contractual commission payments or discretionary. That's a bit of a simple answer to quite a complex question.
Yeah,
Michelle, have you got anything
I would
to say there?
Yeah, I'd recommend that you take specific advice on your individual case. Most commission schemes are generally discretionary commission schemes and therefore wouldn't need to be necessarily paid, but it is a rather complex area of contractual entitlement, so we would recommend that you would seek specialist HR advice before making that final decision.
Okay, and I think just due to timing, I think we'll just take one more. We have an employee who lives in Spain but is paid through the UK payroll. Can he be furloughed?
I suppose the answer to that depends on if he is normally in Spain working for you as a remote worker, in which case, of course, it's quite straightforward. Furloughs for a minimum period of 3 weeks, but employees do have to remain able to return to work. So I think there would have to be a bit of exploration of the specific circumstances there. But on a very broad brush approach, if someone's on a UK PAYE scheme and there is no work for them currently because of this situation, then yes, but I think we'd probably need to know a bit more about the circumstances to give specific advice on that.
Okay, thanks. So anybody who's after more information, as I mentioned before, you can go to our knowledge centre. We have had quite a lot of questions, so we've not got through, and we've probably not even got through half of the questions that we had come in. What we will do is take the questions away, answer them, and we will email everyone a copy. So anyone who's asked any questions, email a copy of all the questions that that were asked. So we are going to set up another webinar. We're going to hopefully do that today, tomorrow, and it's going to be for next week, so it'll be next Tuesday. So again, look out for your invite. You can join us again next week, see what the latest update on the coronavirus is. So thank you for joining today, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.